A saw is a tool consisting of a hard blade, wire, or chain with a toothed edge. It is used to cut through relatively hard material, most often wood. The cut is made by placing the toothed edge against the material and moving it forcefully back and forth. This force may be applied by hand, or powered by steam, water, electricity or other power source. An abrasive saw has a powered circular blade designed to cut through metal. Terminology: heel, the end closest to the handle. Toe, the end farthest from the handle. Front, the side with the teeth. Back, the side opposite the front. Teeth, small, sharp protrusions along the cutting side of the saw. Gullet, the valley between the points of the teeth. Fleam, the angle of the faces of the teeth relative to a line perpendicular to the face of the saw. Rake, the angle of the front face of the tooth relative to a line perpendicular to the length of the saw. Teeth designed to cut with the grain are generally steeper than teeth designed to cut across the grain. Points per inch, the most common measurement of the frequency of teeth on a saw blade. It is taken by setting the tip of one tooth at the 0 point on a ruler, and then accounting the number of points between the 0 mark and the 1 inch mark, inclusive. There is always one more point per inch than there are teeth per inch. Some saws do not have the same number of teeth per inch throughout their entire length, but the vast majority do. Teeth per inch, an alternative measurement of the frequency of teeth on a saw blade. Usually abbreviated TPI, as in, a blade consisting of 18 TPI. Compare points per inch. Kerf, the width of a saw cut, which depends on several factors, the width of the saw blade. The set of the blade's teeth. The amount of wobble created during cutting. And the amount of material pulled out of the sides of the cut. Although the term kerf is often used informally, to refer simply to the width of the saw blade, or to the width of the set, this can be misleading, because blades with the same thickness and set may create different kerfs. For example, a too thin blade can cause excessive wobble, creating a wider than expected kerf. The kerf created by a given blade can be changed by adjusting the set of its teeth with a tool called a sawtooth setter. Set, the degree to which the teeth are bent out sideways away from the blade, usually in both directions. In most modern serrated saws, the teeth are set, so that the kerf will be wider than the blade itself. This allows the blade to move through the cut easily without binding. The set may be different depending on the kind of cut the saw is intended to make. For example, a rip saw has a tooth set that is similar to the angle used on a chisel, so that it rips or tears the material apart. A flush cutting saw has no set on one side, so that the saw can be laid flat on a surface and cut along that surface without scratching it. The set of the blade's teeth can be adjusted with a tool called a sawtooth setter. Abrasive saw, a saw that cuts with an abrasive disc or band, rather than a serrated blade. History. Saws were at first serrated materials such as flint, obsidian, seashells and shark's teeth. In ancient Egypt, open saws made of copper are documented as early as the early dynastic period, circa 3100 to 2686 BC. Examples of saws used for cutting both wood and stone and as a tool for execution of people and models of saws have been found in many contexts throughout Egyptian history. Particularly useful are tomb wall illustrations of carpenters at work that show sizes and the use of different types. Egyptian saws were at first serrated, hardened, copper which cut on both pull and push strokes. As the saw developed, teeth were raked to cut only on the pull stroke and set with the teeth projecting only on one side, rather than in the modern fashion with an alternating set. Saws were also made of bronze and later iron. In the Iron Age frame saws were developed holding the thin blades in tension. The earliest known sawmill is the Roman Hierapolis sawmill from the 3rd century AD and was for sawing stone. According to Chinese legend, the saw was invented by Lu Ban. In Greek mythology, as recounted by Ovid, Talos, the nephew of Daedalus, invented the saw. In archaeological reality, saws date back to prehistory and most probably evolved from Neolithic stone or bone tools. The identities of the axe, adze, chisel, and saw were clearly established more than 4,000 years ago. Manufacture of saws by hand. Until at least the mid-19th century, saws were made laboriously by hand. The teeth were filed out individually, then set by striking alternate teeth with a hammer against a stake, or small anvil. Due to risk of breaking teeth, beginners were given saw-set pliers which set even more slowly. Pit saws. A pit saw was a two-man rip saw. In parts of early colonial North America, it was one of the principal tools used in shipyards and other industries where water-powered sawmills were not available. It was so named because it was typically operated over a saw pit either at ground level or on trestles across which logs that were to be cut into boards by the pit saw were mounted. The pit saw was a strong steel cutting plate, of great breadth, with large teeth, highly polished and thoroughly wrought, some 8 or 10 feet in length with either a handle on either end or a frame saw. A pit saw was also sometimes known as a whip saw. It took 2 to 4 people to operate. A pit man stood in the pit, a top man stood outside the pit, and they worked together to make cuts, guide the saw, and raise it. Pit saw workers were among the most highly paid laborers in early colonial North America. Types of saws: hand saws. Hand saws typically have a relatively thick blade to make them stiff enough to cut through material. Thin-bladed hand saws are made stiff enough either by holding them in tension in a frame, or by backing them with steel or brass. Some examples of hand saws are, bow saw or buck saw, a crosscut saw with a thin blade held in tension in a frame. Coping saw, for cutting wood patterns. Crosscut saw, for cutting wood perpendicular to the grain. Dovetail saw, for cutting intricate joints, mainly found in drawers. Frame saw or sash saw: in general any saw with a thin blade held in tension by a frame. This term often specifically means the rip saw, also called a whip saw. Fret saw, for cutting intricate wood patterns. Hacksaw, a fine-toothed tempered blade under tension, for cutting metal, bone, and other hard materials. Japanese saw, a thin-bladed saw that cuts on the pull stroke. Pad saw or keyhole saw, or jab saw, a narrow-bladed saw. Plywood saw, a fine-toothed saw, for cutting plywood. Rip saw, for cutting wood along the grain. Turning saw, a frame saw with a narrow blade used for cutting curves, larger than a coping saw. Two-man saw, a general term for a large crosscut saw or rip saw for cutting large logs or trees. Veneer saw, a two-edged saw with fine teeth for cutting veneer. Whip saw or pit saw, a kind of rip saw for cutting logs into lumber. Wire saw, a toothed or coarse cable or wire wrapped around the material and pulled back and forth. Back saws. Back saws, so called because they have a thinner blade backed with steel or brass to maintain rigidity, are a subset of hand saws. Back saws have different names depending on the length of the blade. Some examples are, miter saw, for making accurate crosscuts and miters in a workpiece, tenon saw or dovetail saw, or sash saw for doing precision cutting in woodworking. Mechanically powered saws, circular blade saws. Circular saw, a saw with a circular blade which spins. Circular saws can be large for use in a mill or hand-held up to 24 inches. Blades and different designs cut almost any kind of material including wood, stone, brick, plastic, etc. Table saw, a saw with a circular blade rising through a slot in a table. If it has a direct drive blade small enough to set on a workbench, it is called a workbench saw. If set on steel legs, it is called a contractor's saw. A heavier, more precise and powerful version, driven by several belts, with an enclosed base stand, is called a cabinet saw. A newer version, combining the lighter weight mechanism of a contractor's saw with the enclosed base stand of a cabinet saw, is called a hybrid saw. Radial arm saw, a versatile machine, mainly for cross-cutting. The blade is pulled on a guide arm through a piece of wood that is held stationary on the saw's table. Rotary saw or spiral cut saw, or roto-zip for making accurate cuts, without using a pilot hole, in wallboard, plywood, and other thin materials. Electric miter saw or chop saw, or cut-off saw, or power miter box for making accurate crosscuts and miter cuts. The basic version has a circular blade fixed at a 90-degree angle to the vertical. A compound miter saw has a blade that can be adjusted to other angles, A sliding compound miter saw has a blade that can be pulled through the work, in an action similar to that of a radial arm saw, which provides more capacity for cutting wider work pieces. Concrete saw, for cutting concrete or asphalt pavement. Pendulum saw or swing saw, a saw hung on a swinging arm, for the rough cross-cutting of wood in a sawmill and for cutting ice out of a frozen river. Abrasive saw, a circular or reciprocating saw-like tool with an abrasive disc rather than a toothed blade, commonly used for cutting very hard materials. As it does not have regularly shaped edges, the abrasive saw is not a saw in technical terms. Reciprocating blade saws, jigsaw or saber saw, narrow-bladed saw, for cutting irregular shapes. Reciprocating saw or saber saw, a saw with an in and out, or up and down action similar to a jigsaw, but larger and more powerful, and using a longer stroke with the blade parallel to the barrel. Handheld versions, sometimes powered by compressed air, are for demolition work or for cutting pipe. Scroll saw, for making intricate curved cuts. Drag saw, for bucking logs. Frame saw or sash saw, a thin-bladed rip saw held in tension by a frame used both manually and in sawmills. Some whip saws are frame saws and some have a heavy blade which does not need a frame, called a muley or mley saw. Sternal saw, for cutting through a patient's sternum during surgery. Eye saw, for ice cutting. Looks like a muley saw but sharpened as a crosscut saw. Continuous band saw, a rip saw on a motor-driven continuous band. Portable sawmills are typically band sawmills. Chain saws, chainsaw, an engine-driven saw with teeth on a chain normally used as a crosscut saw. Chainsaw mill, a chainsaw with a special saw chain and guide system for use as a rip saw. Types of blades and blade cuts. Most blade teeth are made either of tool steel or carbide. Carbide is harder and holds a sharp edge much longer. Bandsaw blade, a long band welded into a circle, with teeth on one side. Compared to a circular saw blade, it produces less waste because it is thinner, dissipates heat better because it is longer, so there is more blade to do the cutting, and is usually run at a slower speed. Crosscut, in woodworking, a cut made at a right angle to the direction of the wood grain of the workpiece. A crosscut saw is used to make this type of cut. Rip cut, in woodworking, a cut made parallel to the direction of the grain of the workpiece. A rip saw is used to make this type of cut. Ply-tooth blade, a circular saw blade with many small teeth, designed for cutting plywood with minimal splintering. Dado blade, a special type of circular saw blade used for making wide grooved cuts in wood so that the edge of another piece of wood will fit into the groove to make a joint. Some dado blades can be adjusted to make different width grooves. A stacked dado blade, consisting of chipper blades between two dado blades, can make different width grooves by adding or removing chipper blades. An adjustable dado blade has a movable locking cam mechanism to adjust the degree to which the blade wobbles sideways, allowing continuously variable groove widths from the lower to upper design limits of the dado. Strobe saw blade, a circular saw blade with special rakers cutters to easily saw through green or uncured wood that tends to jam other kinds of saw blades. Materials used for saws. There are several materials used in saws, with each of its own specifications. Brass, mostly used in back saws because of its low price and its flow characteristics, which make it relatively easy to cast. Brass contributes to the rigidity that is needed in back saws, which require less force to operate than other kinds of saws because of the pulling motion involved. Steel, used in almost every existing kind of saw. Because steel is cheap, easy to shape, and very strong, it has the right properties for most kind of saws. Diamond, fixed onto the saw blade's base to form diamond saw blades. As diamond is a superhard material, diamond saw blades can be used to cut hard, brittle or abrasive materials, for example, stone, concrete, asphalt, bricks, ceramics, glass, semiconductor and gemstone. There are many methods used to fix the diamonds onto the blade's base, and there are various kinds of diamond saw blades for different purposes. High-speed steel, the whole saw blade is made of high-speed steel. HSS saw blades are mainly used to cut steel, copper, aluminum and other metal materials. If high-strength steels are to be cut, the blades made of cobalt HSS should be used. Tungsten carbide. Normally, there are two ways to use tungsten carbide to make saw blades: carbide-tipped saw blades. The saw blade's teeth are tipped with small pieces of sharp tungsten carbide block. This type of blade is also called TCT saw blade. Carbide-tipped saw blades are widely used to cut wood, plywood, laminated board, plastic, grass, aluminum and some other metals. Solid carbide saw blades. The whole saw blade is made of tungsten carbide. Comparing with HSS saw blades, solid carbide saw blades have higher hardness under high temperatures, and are more durable, but they also have a lower toughness. Uses: saws are commonly used for cutting hard materials. They are used extensively in forestry, construction, demolition, medicine, and hunting. Musical saws are used as instruments to make music. Chainsaw carving is a flourishing modern art form. Special saws have been developed for the purpose. The production of lumber, lengths of squared wood for use in construction, begins with the felling of trees and the transportation of the logs to a sawmill. Plane sawing, lumber that will be used in structures is typically planesawn, a method of dividing the log that produces the maximum yield of useful pieces and therefore the greatest economy. Quarter sawing, this sawing method produces edge grain or vertical gain lumber, in which annual growth rings run more consistently perpendicular to the piece's wider faces. See also: diamond tools, fire saw, saw chain, saw pit, sawmill, sawgrass, sharpening, two-man saw, water saw. References. Further reading: Naylor, Andrew. A Review of Wood Machining Literature with a Special Focus on Sawing. BioRes, April 2013. External links: blade terminology, tooth forms and tooth set, selection of bandsaw blade advancements, saw blade tooth shape, number of teeth you should have on your saw blade, understanding bandsaw blades, blade nomenclature,